Greetings, gentle readers, fellow earthlings. July 4, 2026 today, Independence Day, USA. If there are reports in the air, there are probably celebrations of a sort. America's birthday, is the idea. Reading Foundations has that reading wouldn't be much without the literary or fiction. So today's box of books is fiction. So over the years, in my reading, originally fiction was all I really read for sure, all through my youth, and then besides textbooks, of course, which are fully read, cereal boxes fully read, the newspaper fully read, these kinds of things. Though that the library and reading fiction was a great exercise in learning about language, and then for the views of the world in a sense, and different authors, so many different authors, and the many different characters, and the many different plots. In English class in 7th grade or 8th grade, there was an idea that there are only a number of various plots given, classical plots, basically man versus, and the idea of the protagonists. And so most of what I read is largely of the sort of a narrative of an individual. But there are many accounts of all the characters, which is more of a show. So in an entry into the world of books and fiction, which of course is like from the talk here in Reading Foundations about the suspension of disbelief and the suspension of belief and these kinds of things, makes for so that it's a participatory experience, but it's also kind of an observatory experience. And so reading fiction is for influences then and inspirations also. Well, then let's, I suppose, get into this box of books and find what's fiction and what's not. So this first book, well, this is not fiction. This is Zero, the biography of a dangerous idea. Kind of like infinity, zero is a singularity. The first stack in this box of books, I didn't really get much out of Ruth Rendell's Live Flesh. It's a kind of a detective story, and with regards to that, then I've had this for 25 or 30 years or more, and it just kind of gets carried along in the box of books or the boxes of books. And it's not quite as good for something like Hercule Poirot of Agatha Christie in the story. So compared to something like Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot is a lot more dependable and less likely to flake out and imagine, what was his nemesis Moriarty's name and these sorts of things. Anyways, it's a book. And among many of these authors are very prolific and have written many books. This is Alan Dean Foster. So Alan Dean Foster is a science fiction author that I recall from the 1980s mostly. And so he wrote several movie adaptations or scripts for movies. And then he's got a couple good ones. My favorite is the one about the vampires and about how vampirism is actually kind of a syndrome related to cancer. And then with regards to the metabolisms and the lesser known sorts of metabolisms of life, it's not necessarily so as about like the mystical aspects of such things, but the science fiction. I was really such a reader that my favorite study was science fiction after fantasy. And so I started reading fantasy with the Oz books, probably. This little library I had. By the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I'd read 20 or 30 of these Oz books. They had quite a thorough and full collection. And after I had read most the first 30 of them, they even acquired the later accounts of Baum or Ruth, the author of or authors of the Oz books. And fantasy. And then later it was into science fiction, kind of the heavier and harder sort of books. After something like Clive Cussler or Robert Ludlum, or adventure books they used to call them, or Alistair MacLean, these being books about wartime military adventures, if you might call them, compared to something like Louis L'Amour's The Last of the Breed, which is about a fellow who escapes the Soviet Union, a gulag the hard way kind of a thing, Or speaking of Louis L'Amour, then there's The Lonesome Gods, his other great classic. And then the last or most recent thing I've read of Louis L'Amour was about it was actually kind of science fiction or fantasy book itself, whereas otherwise he usually writes westerns. And so it was a setting where in the Hopi or Anasazi Southwest Indians, where on top of a mesa there was a gateway to a parallel universe, and the people started going back and forth, and so it caused a mystery and an adventure and these kinds of things. That these are sorts of things. So, and then in this book, A Call to Arms, it's not, I wouldn't consider one of the greater books. My favorite from this guy was about that stuff. If that wasn't Paul Anderson or Paul T. Anderson. So Alan Dean Foster and Paul T. Anderson, these were not so much the marquee science fiction types as like, and not talking about Asimov yet, and not talking about Anthony or Piers Anthony yet, or Ray Bradbury, who kind of wrote some fiction and fantasy and science fiction. Or as for the guy who wrote Starship Troopers, Heinlein, are these sorts of accounts. Arthur C. Clarke, a little bit different compared to like Greg Bear, some of the more modern accounts of things. There's Stevenson, the guy who wrote the Eternity of Time or what it was, the Cryptonomicon and the like. After Snow Crash, these are books that were read kind of when they came out. And they're very good. This I just kind of picked up because I recognized the author at a used bookstore. So yeah, most of my books came and went from the library. See, this is Watmo's language. It's Watmo has got a conference named for him in linguistics every year at Harvard. Louis L'Amour's The Sackett brand. These are kind of a serial. He wrote dozens, if not hundreds, of these. A little dusty at times. Slowly disintegrating. This is a book. This is kind of a psychological study. I'm not sure if it's fiction or not. It's a true and extraordinary story. Sybil. Sybil has got multiple personality disorder. A story, it says. See, this is a short history of Africa from the Penguin African Library, Short History of Africa. So this is not fiction. I'll put this over here. Greg Bear was just mentioned. This is Legacy. So he's got Eon Legacy and some other ones. It's kind of like his after Arthur C. Clarke. And the science fiction, a lot of the science fiction ground had already kind of been firmly trod by the time he came along. So try to come up with a new idea, like the fellow Tchaikovsky with the spiders and stuff like that, which is a lot like Werner Vinge's world, where after a long time, all that was left was spiders and spiderwebs. That these are then the stories with characters and their plots, but then it's hard to figure out what would be the theme or the fixture of the science fiction that's either an aspect of science or an aspect of humanity. And so whether it's the science that's central or the humanity that's central, with regards to Star Trek, as about like humanity's efforts and these kinds of things, vis-a-vis something like Star Wars, which is more like what they call space opera. It's just kind of an opera set in space. That these kinds of things. So another genre of the fiction that I didn't read so much was horror. And so this is Clive Barker's Imagica. And so on once it's horror or horrific, like H.P. Lovecraft or Stephen King, and these sorts of accounts is like the most well-known and greatest of the writers in these genres. The greatest, though, is being arbitrary, of course, but well-known and bestsellers being usual count. So Clive Barker's Imagica, after something like the one that made the movies, Hellraiser or something like that. I never really read too much horror, and it's not so much that I just didn't identify, as that I mostly didn't identify with horror and its accounts. So this is a great book, though, and it's very dense text. So these are not easier reads. Like something like Louis L'Amour's The Sackett Brand is a pretty easy read, whereas something like Imagica, with its 800 to 1,200 pages here, is a little bit more, about 800 some pages. And the characters. Magica again is an imaginary land in a parallel sort of universe. Clive Barker again, Galilee. I picked these two up because I was going to reread those again. I've read those before. This is Ian Fleming. So this is another genre of fiction called spy fiction, basically. It's under adventure. So James Bond, of course, is a very well-known number with an ID with various personalities and characters that fill in the role. Dr. No, which is about a villain, a super villain of sorts, with plans to take over the world or otherwise this thing. And then On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is about the Cold War, more so. And Ian Fleming's books are best known as the movies, of course. This is about South America, modern Latin America, continent for men, not fiction. Lucretius on the nature of the universe. So this is theory. This is an account and a great account of a classic exposition of the scientific theory of the day. So Lucretius was a Roman philosopher and theorist from a long time ago. I'm going to put this over here. Let's see. This can go over here in the stack. These are pretty much just going right back in the box. Civilization Transcendence. This is a little handbook and not fiction, but it is literary. And what it's about is from the founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So I got this from the Hare Krishnas. And so that's more of a liturgical account from the Hare Krishnas. Here's Piers Anthony. Now, Piers Anthony was one of my favorite authors for sure as a young man. There's Xanth and the accounts of the magic land of Xanth, and it's basically kind of a copy of Florida, where he lives. And the idea that that series is one of the series that he wrote. He's got like 10 or so different series of books. Trilogies, which have 3 books in them, series with dozens of books, series with 5. Often he has written out here. So this is juxtaposition about phase, and then there's the incarnations of immortality, the bio of a space tyrant, and then also something with regards to the alien encounters of the Chthon series. And then Macroscope and the like, about the science fiction. So this is fantasy and science fiction. This has got fantasy and science fiction together. So this is easy to read, and this is for juniors to read. And it's framed from his writing as kind of he enjoys writing, and he's also yet very open-minded, I would say. So I really enjoy Piers Anthony, and I've read dozens and dozens in most of his works that are regularly printed. Paul Anderson. So I mentioned right before was Paul Anderson. This is exploration. So this is about different accounts of first contact with aliens, and so similarly to Gordon Dixon's For Love Not Human. That's an account of platonic love encounter between humans and aliens, but it would also work for humans and animals. And so these are the accounts of first contact, various accounts of when man and an extraterrestrial society meet for the first time, first contact. The Epic of Gilgamesh, considered a history, yet also just a story, and well put together. This is John D. MacDonald's The Beach Girls. So this is a detective thriller of sort. A thriller, I guess those are called. International Library, International Textbook Company. This is Formulas, Cube Roots, and Logarithms. It's just a table of logarithms and cube roots. A Men's Devotional Bible from Zondervan. This also goes kind of in the liturgical section, or is with regards to that. Oh, this is one of my favorite books ever. This is a wonderful book called The Talisman by Stephen King and Peter Straub. So King is known for his stories where they're horror stories, for example, made in movies, and then all the stuff to do with like Castle Rock Entertainment, there's production company and all this kind of stuff. So that said, this book is different than other ones in this genre. So this book with Stephen King and Peter Straub, The Talisman, is about a boy and a story to save his mother who's dying. And it's a world of parallel universes, and it's an adventure, and it's a horror. And then it involves basically going to hell and back to save somebody. So then he finds a talisman. So the talisman is kind of one of these ideas of like the tower or the Jerusalem or Babylon. The idea of kind of this central nexus of all of reality, and the kind of mystical account of that. So reaching the talisman or the tower is from something like the Gunslinger series from King, which is I read all those several times, and these sorts of accounts has that. This is one of the greater books for the great sacrifice that Wolf, Jackie's friend, the protagonist's friend, makes in this book for his life. And these sorts of things that sometimes, whether you're sentimental or sappy or not, it's that they're touching moments in accounts of reading, and for different people for different reasons. That this is got its touching moments besides just being a way to experience an idea without having to necessarily go through it, and not even necessarily have to put it into the graphical senses instead of just the literary senses. So here that's in reading foundations, that's among the numenological senses is an object sense, a word sense, a time sense, a number sense, and a sense of the continuum. These are the numenological senses besides our phenomenological senses like taste, touch, hearing, sight, and smell, and electrical feeling, heat, pain, anything else that's considered a sense physically. That then these make accounts of the emotional senses and those of infinity or rejection and these kinds of things. Let's see here. This is karate. This is just a manual about karate. It's not so relevant. Leonard Cohen's The Beautiful Losers. So this is a story about it's a character story about some people who basically live on a beach and they got nothing to worry about in the world except all their problems that they have, or their interactions and their developments and these sorts of things. More Piers Anthony, 2 and 4, or volumes 1 and 2 of Bio of a Space Tyrant. Hope Hubris is a character, and who he is it's in space, but it's kind of like with a space opera setting, and so it's he's a migrant, and then he pirates. Kill his family, and it's kind of like the Punisher, but that's the way it starts. And but some of them survive, and so he survives, and then he's a migrant, so he's stateless. And then he joins the Navy to gain citizenship, and then so it's kind of like the story of today's South and Latin America, and it's set directly in those terms. And then he rises to a great account of being a tyrant in the governing sphere and realm. It's an epic sort of story, and it's again with adult themes for sure. And then as with regards to its ideas of. It has some political ideas and then some ideas on the practical statesmanship and practical government. So that's something else. Now this book, Time Storm, is something that I've carried around with me for a long time. Gordon Dixon's Time Storm is a story about there's an event that it's a world-changing event that splits the world up into all these different places where different times and places are thrown all together in different reasons. So these timelines just start crossing over all the places. So on this side of the line, it's 10,000 years ago, and that side of the line is 10,000 years in the future. And so in the epic and in the adventure, he goes on to discover how to solve the issue, because it's kind of like Infinite Crisis on Infinite Earths or something like that, when all the parallel universes start crashing together and destroying each other. That the idea here is that is kind of similar in this work. Yet it's framed a little bit more about the cosmic and the energy lines and these sorts of accounts. So that mention that Crisis on Infinite Earths, that was from comic books. So there were two major comic book vendors, DC and Marvel. And so they basically copied each other, and whatever was successful, then the other one would just copy it. They just copy each other back and forth all these many times. And so that's been turned into like the sensational in the movies and all these kinds of things. Yet at the same time, all the canon and these sorts of accounts of the stories are that graphic novels and comic books or graphic novels are a great sort of milieu also for fiction, but they kind of start to cross the line between the literary and text, reading, and watching, or otherwise the graphical part of the graphical novels. So this is not my box of comic books, which is in another box somewhere. I have Punisher, and Martial Law is my favorite anti-hero of a sort, and a variety of other comic books. Anyways, that's maybe for later. At a later date, that will surface, but not here. Anyways, Gordon Dixon's Time Storm, and for Love Not Human mentioned before. These are great books. Hermann Hesse's Steppenwolf. So Hesse's, now this is considered a little bit more of the literature than just the fiction. So what's the difference between fiction and literature? Well, generally the idea is that literature is written about in literary journals and fiction is not. And so then as with regards to that, this is kind of literary account. So any fiction, the difference between the fiction and the literary is not so different. But then this, and whether it's structured as like a logical account or a philosophical experience, this Steppenwolf is something that compared to Beneath the Wheel, other works from Hermann Hesse, or Siddhartha. Siddhartha is kind of the greatest, and there's a good movie for it as well. Beneath the Wheel is a tragedy. Magister Ludi is a tragedy. Steppenwolf is kind of in the middle, and it's just kind of about coming of age and coming to terms with life and these kinds of things. So kind of like the Unbearable Lightness of Being, that's considered literary, and it's fictional in an account with regards to whether they're real world experiences or just relations of their personal and own accounts. That varies. So this is Nobel Prize winner. Here they have Nobel Prizes for literature. Writing in the existential tradition of Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, he was one of the first novelists to make use of the discoveries of Sigmund Freud. So those were addicts. Speculations on the supernatural. So Steppenwolf is Hermann Hesse's best-known work. It is a profoundly memorable and affecting novel. The gripping and fascinating story of disease in a man's soul and the savage indictment of bourgeois society. Now, the bourgeois is the upper middle class, and so it's not the proletariat. So a savage indictment of bourgeois society is basically the social class here is what that would be about. Frank Herbert, The White Plague. So Frank Herbert, most famous for Dune, of course, and then had the Dosadi experiment, the one about the food cultures, the one about the oil submarines, the one about the God, the God experiment or something like that. That's like the Dosadi experiment in that. It has that Frank Herbert wrote some great epics, and is also in science fiction explored some really interesting concepts with regards to psychology, ecology, and those kinds of surrounds. And then with regards to like legend and what's the word? Dynasty and all that sort of account. That's more the character study in the plot and how it goes. Gene Owl's The Mammoth Hunters. So this series of books starts with Clan of the Cave Bear, then Valley of the Horses, and this is The Mammoth Hunters. Then there's a few more. After the first few books got published, they became incredibly popular and were bestsellers. They made some movies. I don't know if they ever made movies past the first one, with Daryl Hannah, say. And then this later account then of the following ones follows the story of the trail of Jayla, or Ayla, not Jayla. Jayla is a different person. Ayla and Jondalar, who's they're mates, and they travel over basically from the Caucasus Mountains to France in prehistoric Ice Age times, and so it accounts for all these different things that get discovered, like taming animals, or the spear thrower, or how to make technology, and these kinds of accounts. Many different kinds of accounts of technology, and then the social, and then the very very small world settings that these are. They're very 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 few people, and so the accounts of the characters and their traditions and these sorts of things. So, anyways, this is sort of historical fiction from a prehistorical time, and it was a bestseller in the '80s for sure. So this is the one after the previous one. July 4th today. July 5th will be tomorrow. Birthdays, my grandfather, one of them, and my niece, one of them. And so it's convenient when they have the same birthday because it's easier to remember. I don't remember too many birthdays, for example, remembering all these other things. Here's more historical fiction. This is Margaret George's The Memoirs of Cleopatra. I read this, and since I also watched the movie Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor the other month or last year. And so reading this book then it's a dedicated account of historical fiction from Cleopatra's perspective, and mostly about Cleopatra and Mark Antony, and the tragedy that befalls them, and because Mark Antony isn't that great of a general, although he was a great leader of a sort, but he's not a very good strategist, and so it just doesn't work out so great. But this story is well known, or the story of Cleopatra, who, for being an Egyptian, was a Hellene or Greek, as from the various accounts of the Alexander and the times in Persia and the empire of Alexander, what became of that part of the world, and then what became with regards to the expansion of the Roman Empire. Then this is basically before the Roman Empire was really the biggest thing. Star Trek, The Next Generation, Unification. At last, the generations meet. A novel by Jerry Taylor, based on the 2-part television episode. Spock visits the bridge. Robert A. Heinlein, Citizen of the Galaxy. So this is one where it's an example of, in various accounts of fiction, people have to win their citizenship. And so this is one of these accounts where he does so. Greg Bear's Eternity. So similarly, from even before, this is a sequel to the national bestseller Eon. Talk about genetic material or prying apart planets. Bear goes about the task with intelligence and a powerful imagination. Well, I'm running out of stacks here. I gotta kind of unstack this a bit. But we'll get through this box here rather briefly. I've read all these books. It takes a long time. But then I don't necessarily keep books after I read them, but I tend to. Larry Niven's The Smoke Ring. So Larry Niven has two famous milieus. One is Ringworld, which is like a giant ring around a sun that makes like a strip of land Earth-size wide. It's a giant macro structure in space. And on it, these aliens called the Pack Protectors have made it so that every single species they've been able to find in the galaxy for hundreds and hundreds of light years around, they made a copy of their planet and then captured some of them and seeded them on these planets to let them just kind of grow naturally. It's kind of like a zoo, or it's like a protectorship of these humanoids. They're all humanoids, is the idea. So, and about Louis Wu and the account of discovering the ring world, and there are non-humanoid creatures in this account too, like the Kazin or the cat people, vis-a-vis dog people, vis-a-vis all these kinds of accounts of aliens that are like, well, they're like, are there like pig aliens, dog aliens, bear aliens, wolf aliens, cat aliens, elephant aliens, cetaceans, the whales, humans, humanoids, various kinds of chimpanzees, insects, Dralosites from Star Frontiers, the rock people with silicon life, or these kinds of accounts, natural silicon life, compared to like Transformers or Mechatronic or these kinds of things, different kinds of life in the universe. Anyways, in that one is pretty much all humanoids, and the pack protectors are actually kind of jealous protectors of the humanoid species, are those. And then in the smoke ring after the integral trees, this is one where it's an environment where people live in this microgravity environment and they're just kind of floating in the air. So it's like a gas giant planet, and then these giant trees grow on it. That's kind of like their islands that they live on. Compared to like the story of like the floating island, which is an idea from something like the children's treasury of the illustrated treasury of children's literature. There's a story about this pirate island that just kind of floats around, and it's similarly in this the account, but it's not so much like Swiss Family Robinson or Robinson Crusoe, yet an account here of this kind of thing, vis-a-vis My Side of the Mountain or the Boxcar Children. Counts of ingenuity, survival, and adaptation to the elements and the conditions and these kinds of things. Smoke Ring, then. That's a series. This is Mark Twain, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So, Huckleberry Finn lights out, and meaning he runs away to go see the world. And it wasn't because his life was so bad. It's just he was just feeling a growth, a spurt of independence, is the general idea. Or maybe he got in trouble for something trivial. I forget how it starts, but then that's considered literary because so many people have studied it then. And so the accounts of this are from the Old South, and the accounts of Huck Finn and his friend Jim, and they on their rafting trip on the Old Miss, the Mississippi River. And then there's more to it to be read from this and that, compared to like the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, compared to like the adventures of Gulliver's Travels or something like that. That these were accounts that there weren't so many books that were widely published in these longer ago times. So Mark Twain is a 19th century author compared to like Larry Niven. He wrote this in the 1980s or something like that. So these are accounts. Oh, this is a book. J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. So this young man is in junior high or high school. I imagine he's a high schooler, and he's got depression, and at the same time he's really caring. You know, he's in there. You know, and he again makes some kind of account of his independence, and is like about school and his sister and his experiences. That J.D. Salinger wrote this book, and then it's considered literary because it was studied in a school. And then, as with regards to its happiness, is that he imagines this really happy place is like when people are running through the field. The catcher in the rye is people running through a field of ryegrass. And what if they fell or got lost or slipped out? He's like, all I want to be is the catcher in the rye. That somebody like his sister, for example, for whom he has a protective instinct, that if they were to fall out, that somebody would be there to catch him, because he sees so many cases of injustice, hypocrisy, or badness in the world that it really sours his image of the human condition or human nature. And so and he might end up in a sanatorium or an asylum for those suffering from severe medically categorized mental illness. But Cohen, or what's the fellow's name? I don't remember so much the protagonist names as the other ones. Ackley, Old Alley, Ackley. Other books by J.D. Salinger include Nine Stories, Franny and Zoe, Raise High the Roof Beam, Carpenters, and Seymour, an introduction. I've heard of Franny and Zoe, but I don't know what those other books are. Caulfield, Holden Caulfield. I haven't found it yet, but that's his name. Anyways, it's a pretty good book, and it's easy reading, and it's written in the vernacular of teens at the time. Stephen King, The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger. So this is the final book in the Gunslinger series. Oh, it's the first book. This is the Dark Tower. So this is I think this is the last book. In the Gunslinger series. And what I read recently, I've read book 6 recently, and then in book 7. So I think that's this one. And this is the Gunslinger. Oh, this is the Dark Tower series, the Gunslinger book. I get it. Yeah, this is number 1 of that, and it's a paperback edition of from Signet Book, a division of Penguin Books. At any rate, this is well read here. First Signet printing, July 1989. Flight of the Intruder, Stephen Kuntz. So this fellow, he wrote this book. It's about Vietnam War, and he's flying an airplane, so it's a side by side, and so he's sitting next to the co-pilot, and a farmer in the field below just raises his rifle and shoots in the air, and the bullet happens to kill his co-pilot, and then it crashes or something like that. And then the story starts. So I haven't read that in a while. I don't quite remember what happens. Michael Crichton. Now, you don't hear so much about this guy these days, but he was incredibly popular in the 80s with regards to Sphere and Hot Zone about Ebola virus. Sphere being about discovering an alien interface underneath the ocean, kind of like The Abyss, a lot like The Abyss, or with many similar themed elements, though it has its own movie. Crichton is a medical doctor, and so he writes from that kind of account. So this is Congo. Oh, and he wrote Rising Sun as well. Congo. This is about a lost city. I don't really recall otherwise the plot of Congo. But in the accounts of the prehistory have that before the flood or the antediluvian time of Atlantis, and so the time of the Nubian, when the Africa's continent had like this society called Nubia. The idea that there are still like the ancient things to be found in all around the world, but basically in a lot of it in the equatorial belt from like the time of the ice ages, because in the ice ages the glaciers kind of filled in most of the world except the equatorial belt. These are accounts then of stories about them. Oh, here's that Love Not Human by Gordon R. Dickson, the Hugo-winning award of the child cycle novels. Here's like a big brontosaurus, like a Nessie monster, is saving this diver. The most powerful force in the universe, love. From the icy depths of Loch Ness to the alien skies of Arcturus IV, from the strange people at the top of the hill to a lonely computer, from tentacled Mirians and swamp-dwelling Sidorians to a telepathic dog and genius IQ cat, Gordon R. Dickson, Nebula and Hugo-winning author of the fabulous Dorsey saga, or Dorsai, these are made-up words largely, spans space and time to explore the secrets of the human and inhuman heart. It's a good book. It's a happy book. Piers Anthony Fractal Mode. So this is the Mode series. So the other one was the Phase series. This is the Mode series. Teen fantasy fiction. Cyrano de Bergerac by Edmond Rostand. Translated by Brian Hooker. complete and unabridged. Cyrano de Bergerac is this fellow. He's a Frenchman, if I recall correctly. And this is a play. And what it's about is that Cyrano is a literary man. And so this is highly valued, and being able to then afford a turn of phrase, or to be to write well, to speak well, and to write well, being considered about the same or much the same. Then has that Cyrano de Bergerac. He's got this giant proboscis of a nose, and so he considers himself kind of not disfigured, but in a sense he's very self-conscious, and other people are very self-conscious that he has a very large nose, and so it puts people off. But otherwise he's got great pride, and it's due because he's a genius. So one of this other fellows, he's in love with who would be his paramour, but she won't have anything to do with him because he doesn't write or speak very well. So he hires or convinces Cyrano de Bergerac to speak for him, and so to write his words, and make it so that then and then the female protagonist, I suppose, is it's a famous meme, or something, not Helen, but it was something else who was kind of given, kind of like Don Quixote's Doña, or something like that, his love for his devotion. That we got Carbone, Cyrano de Guiche, if I'm not mispronouncing that, to Roxanne. Roxanne was the object of their desire and love. Cyrano and Christian, and Carbone, Ragueneau, and the first poet and third poet, The Apprentice, and so on. A play in 5 acts, 3 acts, 5 acts. Larry Niven, the Ringworld Engineer. So this is the Ringworld series then. Jean le Carré. So this is back to spy, adventure, espionage novels. So Jean le Carré, it wrote like Tinker Soldier, Sailor Spy. This is The Night Manager. And their stories set in France, largely England or France, and a lot of times around like Nice or Marseille. And what it is just about espionage, and so some of it's mostly state level espionage, vis-a-vis like corporate level espionage, or these sorts of accounts. So The Night Manager is probably about the changing of the guard, or who has the password when things change and stuff like that. Compared to like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, John le Carré has a number of novels, and they're kind of hard to get into, but worth reading. And unlike like the James Bond novels, which are made right in the movies, these are as much kind of made from the movies, or made from the stories, these kinds of things. Clive Barker. Magica Book 2, The Reconciliation. Magica Book 2. I'm not sure if my other copy of Magica just has these together. This is another 500 pages. Arthur C. Clarke, The Songs of Distant Earth. See, here's Louis L'Amour, Riding for the Brand, and Louis L'Amour, Sackett's Land. So these are, again, like serials and westerns. They're about like the expansion to the West. And it's considered that the West was largely unpeopled. And so it was with regards to colonization and the integration of the indigenous, or the pogroms, or war against the indigenes, is the idea that a lot of Indians integrated into white society in the expansion from the West. So it's a usual idea and account that when the Indians saw the white man coming, that they said, "Hey, this is coming." The iron locomotive, or the accounts of the technology and this and that. So that said, there's still great tragedies and stories of wrong, but then these books are not cowboys and Indians books. They're mostly about they're more like cattlemen versus sheep herders or something like that, and the account of the Wild West with the ideals of the honesty and the honor. There was definitely an account of honor in these books. There wasn't much in the way of moral ambiguity and these kinds of things. Arthur C. Clarke. Nature's End. Chillingly Credible. Whitley Strieber and James Konetka. The year is 2025. Immense numbers of people swarm the globe. In countless astonishing ways, technology has triumphed, but at a staggering cost. Starvation is rampant. City dwellers gasp for breath under blackened skies, and tottering on the brink of environmental collapse, the world may be ending. So this book was from, there's accounts like dystopian future and tragedies and this kind of thing. So this is from Warner Communications Company, Warner Books, 1986. The industries of eastern New Jersey were exported to Taiwan and Korea and China decades ago. So this would be an interesting kind of take on what the idea of the perspective would be about how things worked out in terms of the Malthusian dilemma and vis-a-vis environmental catastrophe and these kinds of things. Isaac Asimov, Nightfall, and Other Stories. So a collection of short stories. So short stories are a little bit more silly, and these have kind of comments from him before the story, compared to his more structured accounts. This is a library book. So it was first checked out. It looks like on October. It was acquired in October 1969. Checked out on October 30th, 1969. And then the last entry in here, there's about 10, 20, 30, 35 entries in this book have been checked out, was 1981. And then it was discontinued in 2005. It's discarded. And so I picked this up maybe at a book sale from the library or something like that. But Asimov's kind of got some cachet, so that's what it is. James Clavell, Noble House. So James Clavell has got these accounts of a great industrialist, a Westerner who lives in Hong Kong. And so Noble House and James Clavell and Shogun and this kind of stuff is about the accounts of this the Noble House is great, basically this magnates or whatever, the account of that story is in the eastern part of the world and with the Western influence and these sorts of things. So James Clavell is famous for movies and books, and this is in one of them. I haven't read or thought about this in a long time, but it's interesting when you think about these aspects of all the possibilities in the world, then it's remarkable to think it's like that is in part real, or it really is real, and so then trying to figure that out is always fun. Okay, getting to the bottom of this here. James L. Chalker, Lords of the Middle of Dark. So this is fantasy from the 1980s, and what it is this savage sort of guy. He's found a great giant silicon brain underneath his temple somewhere. So that reminds me of something like L. Ron Hubbard with the one where the guy, the aliens come and kill most of the people on the earth to steal the gold, and so one of them survives, and then he walks up and ends up walking into a dusty complex, and so he learns that there's a history before him, and it wasn't just hiding from the cyclos, as they call themselves, or were called. And then later he gets put into a learning machine to make him useful, but then he overuses the learning machine and makes himself smart. And so then with his acquired knowledge, then he overturns it and destroys the evil overlords, the idea being. Larry McMurtry, Some Can Whistle. Mostly known for the guy with being like the river runs through it, is that right? A Western kind of. A character study. It just one of these random. That's kind of random for me. I don't have an idea about it. Sigmund Freud, Civilization and Its Discontents. This is kind of fiction, and it's framed as like he's sort of an expert. He's supposed to be a psychologist, and then as with regard to that, and so I'm not trying to put down Sigmund Freud, but it's a view and a lens. It's not really necessarily the thing. The seminal volume of 20th century thought, a brilliant summary on the views of culture from a psychoanalytical perspective that had been developing since the turn of the century. Oh, he's saying that the law is like a violent individual. So, I mean, you kind of can, psychological projection is the idea that whatever anybody says, it's kind of what they are. And that's not to be wrongly made is when people are making true sorts of allegations that they're guilty of it themselves. But the idea of psychological projection is generally through the lens that whatever someone notices, that's what they see. And so here I'd hope that the psychological projection is a count of a conscience, kind of first class, a lens of psychological projection. That the idea of psychological projection vis-a-vis the account of the telepathy and these sorts of things are not quite the same sort of genre at all. Yet it is so then for speaking well and writing well that it is a matter of expression. And so these are the sorts of things, projection and expression. And so he's talking about the inclination to aggression and these kinds of things. Primitive peoples. Freud writes this: having reached the end of his journey, the author must ask his readers forgiveness for not having been a more skillful guide, for not having spared them empty stretches of road and troublesome detours. There's no doubt that it could have been done better. Well, talking about the superego. This function consists in keeping a watch over the actions and intentions of the ego and judging them, and exercising a censorship, or opening it up and saying it's not enough to say that the superego is regulatory control functions. Instead, sometimes the superego is part of the mathematical consciousness. Is like, and open up. There is some other reason than our lizardian brain, or the id, the ego, and the superego, or the superego, the ego, and the id. The idea that Freud's is a half account of popular psychology. Piers Anthony Kirlian Quest. So this is one of the ones where it's whether it's a human or it's just a protagonist, and this is projection more in the sense of like astral projection, in the sense of that it's possible, if not to go faster than the speed of light, any amount of mass at all, because it would just be arbitrarily contrived, to send just information infinitely fast. And so there is, at a large enough cost, the tiniest amount of information can be like an entire program of something in the information theoretic sense. So this has a great science aspect of it, science fiction, because it explains how it'd be possible to have this sort of thing scientifically, meeting our theories and expectations matters of truth, and then being all the fantastic that would so entail, and all this kind of stuff. So that's the box here. Oh, there's one more book in here. Oh, this is Noble House again. We already looked at that. Okay, so then that said, that's what I want to do today, because now I can put all these books back in this box and take this box back to storage, and then go get some more of the boxes of books. so that then the next episode will have that. This is like some fiction, and I have another box or two of fiction, but then everything else is kind of more technical. For example, the other day I found one that's got like all the manuals for Win32 programming and Mac OS X programming, the printed manuals, all the documentation. So I think I might grab that one next because it'd be possible then to kind of look through those with regards to talking about Windows and Mac OS operating systems. So that said, then fiction and what there is to be read of it. That gives a brief summary, at least of my influences. William Shakespeare. Well, everybody had to study that a bit in school. What else did we study as in terms of literature in school? Well, there's the Scarlet Letter. That's an account of ostracism, and it involves sexuality and gender and love and forbidden love. The Scarlet Letter, and these sorts of things. What were otherwise that we didn't have too much required reading. And I'm just trying to recall what were some other things we studied. Huck Finn, we read some Huck Finn, then some Shakespeare, and these sorts of things. These were like the required studies for the literary sort of thing, compared to something like Herman Melville. I really like Herman Melville. He's a great writer. Hemingway is not so much. Now I had some other fiction. There might be some more fiction in this other box of books that I was intending to look at. I've been reading Garp again, The World According to Garp. So this is John Irving, and so he's considered literary, but it's very popular. So you got like A Prayer for Owen Meany, or The Cider House Rules, or some of these other books. The Son of the Circus. These are accounts of various characters. The Hotel New Hampshire, if that's the same author, and about these families and their events, and it's kind of an anxiety-prone guy, at the same time very calmed down, and then always so influenced by his biography. I have a copy of his biography. It's even signed. I found it at the bookstore one day. And so that's an interesting read. It gives an insight into the fellow about his love of wrestling and these kinds of things, and his love of writing and this and that. And then with regards to writing fiction, it's its own kind of place, because it's not the same thing as writing nonfiction or writing a biography or autobiography or a narrative of factual events. And so that comes kind of the poetical license. But at the same time, that's again after the suspension of disbelief. Those two different things is the idea. So that said, reading fiction is a great exercise. One, in making mental models of the world, and indeed worlds that are not already or at all available to our senses. And that's different than the usual account of video or the accounts of where the sensory input is provided, and so the reading is greatly facilitated by giving something enjoyable to read, or just for interest for its own sake, even prurient interest, and then being able to give a reason for it to go find a book like about ninjas or adventure stories or these sorts of accounts, and as to why then that the reading foundations has that reading fiction is a great account of the development of the capacity to absorb a book in so few hours or a day or two, vis-a-vis how long it takes to read a book. That the only way to be able to learn to read a book in like a day is to read a lot of days' books, and until it goes from days per book to books per day, and so speed reading and including the ability to gain comprehension and of relevant or considered salient facts, that is part of reading foundations. the reading and the foundations. Well then, good day, gentle readers. July 4th, Independence Day. Happy birthdays tomorrow, and all this kind of thing. The previous box of books was Quantum Mechanics, and it took like 8 or 10, 12 episodes just kind of get through that. And so we'll see then what the next box of books brings, and hopefully then for reading and foundations, they'll continue to accumulate in this series about some of the influences of the literature and fiction, and the accounts of the great stories that are more so for the older generations, very, very common among many, many people. These are the influences of people who read. Warm regards. Goodbye.